The rope burned against Elara's wrists as her oldest brother, Cain, shoved her forward through the darkness. She stumbled over exposed roots, her bare feet screaming in protest against the frozen forest floor. The moon hung fat and accusatory overhead, casting silver light through the skeletal branches that clawed at her dress as she passed. "Keep moving," Cain growled, his fingers digging into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. Behind them, she could hear her other two brothers arguing in harsh whispers, their voices carrying through the winter air like the hiss of serpents. "You said 300 silver pieces. The messenger promised 300. That was Dane, always concerned with money, always counting coins that weren't his yet." "Shut your mouth before they hear you," Marcus snapped back. "We're lucky they're taking her at all. A wolfless omega with a cursed bloodline. We should be paying them." The words hit Elara like physical blows, but she'd learned long ago not to show pain. Not to these men who shared her blood but had never once treated her like family. She focused instead on putting one foot in front of the other, on breathing through the panic that threatened to close her throat. She wasn't being traded. She wasn't being sent away for her own good, like Cain had claimed when he'd woken her in the dead of night. She was being sold. The realization settled into her bones with the certainty of prophecy. Her brothers had finally found a use for her, and it had a price tag attached. 300 silver pieces, less than the cost of a decent breeding mare. How much further? Cain's voice was tight with nerves. Even he, the strongest of them, the one who'd inherited their father's position as pack enforcer, was afraid. That fear should have comforted Elara. Instead, it terrified her. Because if Cain was afraid of where they were going, of who they were meeting, then Elara should be absolutely petrified. "The border's just ahead," Dane said, and there was something in his voice that made Elara's stomach drop. Excitement, greed, relief. "Once we cross into Shadowmere territory, we hand her over and we're done. We can finally be rid of her." Shadowmere, the name alone was enough to make grown wolves whimper. The rival pack, people called them, though that was a gentle term for what they really were. Shadowmere was the largest, most brutal pack in the Northern Territories, ruled by an Alpha King whose reputation for violence preceded him like a war banner. They said he'd killed his own father to take the throne. They said he collected the heads of his enemies and mounted them on pikes outside his fortress. They said he had never taken a mate, because no she-wolf had ever been strong enough to survive his claiming. And Elara's brothers were delivering her directly to him. "Wait," the word escaped before she could stop it, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, whatever they're paying you, I'll find a way to earn it back. I'll work harder. I'll take on extra duties. I'll do anything, just please don't." The backhand came so fast she didn't see it. Pain exploded across her cheek, and she tasted copper as her teeth cut into the soft flesh of her mouth. She hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. "You'll do what you're told," Cain said, his voice cold and final. "For once in your miserable existence, you'll actually be useful to this family." Elara stayed on the ground, her vision swimming with tears she refused to shed. Through the blur she could see the tree line ahead, and beyond it, a subtle shift in the air. A boundary. The moment they crossed it, she would no longer be under her own pack's protection, such as it was. She would belong to Shadowmere. She would belong to the Alpha King. Strong hands hauled her to her feet, and this time it was Marcus who held her, his grip almost apologetic. "Almost. It's better this way," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. "You'll see, maybe they'll actually find a use for you there." The laugh that escaped Elara's throat was hollow and broken. A use for her. As if she were a tool to be utilized, a resource to be exploited. That's all she'd ever been to the Clearwater Pack, the family she'd been born into but never truly belonged to. The unwanted daughter of a dead Luna, the girl whose birth had cost her mother's life, the Omega who'd failed to shift even as she'd approached her 20th year. Wolfless, cursed, worthless. The words had followed her since childhood, whispered behind hands, spoken to her face, carved into her identity until she'd almost believed them herself. Almost. Because late at night, when the pack house finally fell silent and she was alone in her tiny room in the servants' quarters, Elara felt something else. Something that hummed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat, something that pulsed in time with the moon overhead. It wasn't the wolf she'd been told she'd never have. It was something older, something that terrified her even as it called to her with a voice like thunder and starlight. The herbs helped suppress it. The bitter tea her brothers forced down her throat every morning, claiming it was for her health, for her protection. She believed them for years, choking down the acrid liquid without question. It was only recently that she'd started to suspect the truth. They weren't protecting her, they were containing her. Border ahead, Dane announced, and Elara could hear the shapes moving in the darkness beyond the trees. Wolves, large ones, the Shadowmere patrol waiting to collect their purchase. Kane's hand tightened on her arm one last time before he shoved her forward, across an invisible line that changed everything. The moment her feet touched Shadowmere soil, the air around her shifted, grew heavier, charged with a power that made her skin prickle and her pulse race. 3 massive wolves emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing amber in the moonlight. They didn't shift, didn't need to. Their presence alone was a threat, a promise of violence should anyone step out of line. A man followed behind them, tall and scarred, his authority evident in the way he carried himself. "The girl," he said simply, his voice like gravel. It wasn't a question. "As promised," Kane replied, all business now, the fear buried beneath layers of false confidence. "Untouched, healthy, she'll make a decent servant once you break her in properly." The scarred man's eyes slid to Elara, assessing her like livestock. She forced herself to stand straight despite the trembling in her legs, despite the urge to run screaming back into the forest. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not yet. "Payment," the man said, and one of the wolves shifted, becoming a younger man who stepped forward with a leather pouch. The sound of coins clinking together made Elara's stomach turn. Dane snatched the pouch eagerly, his fingers already counting the silver inside. "It's all here," he said, relief flooding his features. 300 just like we agreed." "Then we're done," the scarred man gestured, and 2 of the wolves flanked Elara, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from their massive bodies. "Cross back into your territory, and don't return. The Alpha King doesn't appreciate repeat visitors." If you're watching this and wondering what happens when Elara realizes the Alpha King knows things about her he shouldn't, when she discovers that he's been waiting for her his entire life, keep watching. Because what comes next will change everything you think you know about fate, about destiny, and about the girl her brothers thought was worthless. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens when the most powerful alpha in the north finally comes face to face with the mate he's dreamed about since childhood. Elara's brothers didn't even look back as they disappeared into the trees, their footsteps fading into silence until she was alone with strangers who smelled of pine and smoke, and something darker. Something that made the suppressed thing inside her stir restlessly. "Walk," the scarred man commanded, and Elara had no choice but to obey, falling into step between the 2 wolves as they led her deeper into Shadowmere territory. The forest grew denser here, the trees older and more gnarled, their branches weaving together overhead to block out most of the moonlight. She could hear water running somewhere in the distance, and the occasional howl that made her blood run cold. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes before the trees began to thin, revealing a fortress that stole what little breath Elara had left. It rose from the earth like something carved from the mountain itself, all dark stone and sharp angles, with towers that pierced the sky like claws. Torches burned along the walls, casting dancing shadows that made the whole structure seem alive. This was the seat of Shadowmere's power, the home of the Alpha King. And somehow, impossibly, Elara felt a pull toward it, toward something waiting inside those walls. "Keep moving," one of the wolves growled, nudging her forward when she hesitated. They led her through gates that groaned as they opened, across a courtyard where more wolves watched with hungry eyes, and finally into the fortress itself. The interior was warmer than she'd expected, lit by fires that burned in massive hearths and illuminated by chandeliers made of antlers and iron. Tapestries hung on the walls depicting battles and wolves and a bloodline that stretched back centuries. Everywhere she looked, Elara saw strength, power, legacy. Everything her own pack had lost generations ago. They climbed stairs that seemed to go on forever, passing corridors and chambers until Elara lost all sense of direction. Finally, the scarred man stopped before a set of double doors carved with images of wolves running beneath a full moon. "The Alpha King has requested you be brought to him immediately upon arrival," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been sympathy. "Try not to anger him. The last Omega who displeased him didn't last the night." The words were meant to frighten her, and they succeeded. But Elara was already so far beyond fear that it barely registered as the doors swung open and she was pushed inside. The chamber was enormous, dominated by a massive desk covered in maps and documents, shelves lined with books, and a fireplace large enough to stand in. But Elara's attention went immediately to the man standing at the window, his back to her, his silhouette outlined by moonlight. Even without seeing his face, she knew who he was. Power radiated from him like heat, making the air itself feel heavy. He was tall, broader than any man she'd ever seen, his dark hair touching his shoulders. He wore simple clothes, but they did nothing to diminish the authority that clung to him like a second skin. Alpha King of Shadowmere, the monster from 1,000 whispered warnings. The doors closed behind her with a finality that made Elara flinch. She was alone with him now, in his private chambers, with no one to hear her scream. "Come here," his voice was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of absolute command, not a request, an order. Elara's feet moved before her mind could process the decision, carrying her forward until she stood in the center of the room. She kept her eyes down, her hands clasped in front of her, her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Look at me." She didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at her to keep her head bowed, to make herself small and unthreatening, but the command in his voice left no room for disobedience. Slowly, Elara raised her eyes, and the world stopped. Cale had turned from the window, and the face that met hers was not what she'd expected. He was young, perhaps only a handful of years older than her, with features that would have been beautiful if not for the hard edge that experience had carved into them. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, grey and intense, and they fixed on her with an expression she couldn't name. Recognition, that's what it was. He looked at her like he knew her. Elara, her name on his lips was a caress, a prayer, a claim. "You're finally here." The words made no sense. Finally, as if he'd been waiting, as if her arrival was something anticipated rather than a transaction. "How do you know my name?" The question escaped before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted her boldness. She braced for anger, for violence, for the punishment that surely came with questioning an Alpha King. Instead, Cale smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his face into something almost gentle. "I've known your name since I was 7 years old," he said quietly. "I've known the sound of your voice, the scent of your skin, the exact shade of your eyes when you cry. I've known you my entire life, Elara, even though we've never met." The room tilted. Elara's mind struggled to process his words, to make them fit into any reality that made sense. "I don't understand." "I know you don't." Cale moved toward her, each step measured and careful, as if approaching a wild animal. "But you will. In time you'll understand everything. For now, all you need to know is that you're safe here. No one will hurt you. No one will sell you or trade you or treat you as anything less than what you are." "And what am I?" Elara heard herself ask, her voice small and broken. Cale stopped just in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Up close he was even more overwhelming, his presence filling her senses until there was room for nothing else. He raised one hand slowly, giving her time to flinch away, and brushed his fingers against her cheek where Cain had struck her. The touch was feather-light, but it sent electricity racing through her entire body. The thing inside her that she'd suppressed for so long surged forward, desperate and yearning, recognizing something in him that called to it. "You're mine," Cale said simply, and the words carried the weight of absolute truth. "You've always been mine, since before you were born, since before I was born, and I have waited my entire life for you to find your way home. If this doesn't make sense to you yet, trust me, it gets so much more intense. The Alpha King isn't just powerful. He's been seeing Elara in his dreams since he was a child. He knows things about her no one should know. And when she finds out why her brothers really sold her, why they've been suppressing her wolf and what she actually is, everything changes. Stay with me. You need to see what happens next." Elara's life before that night in Cale's chambers had been a study in survival. The Clearwater Pack had once been prosperous, respected, a force in the Southern Territories. But that was before her birth, before her mother, Luna Catherine, had died bringing her into the world during a blood moon. The Pack's fortune had died with Catherine, or so the story went. Her father, Alpha Thomas, had never recovered from the loss. He looked at Elara and seen only the daughter who'd cost him his mate, his love, his reason for living. By the time she was old enough to remember, he was already a hollow shell of a man, ruling through her older half-brothers while he drowned himself in drink and regret. Elara's brothers had inherited their father's resentment. Cain, the eldest and strongest, had viewed her as a burden from the start. Marcus had been indifferent, treating her like a piece of furniture he had to step around. Dane had been the cruelest, finding creative ways to remind her daily that she was unwanted, unnecessary, a mistake that should have been corrected years ago. When she'd failed to shift at 13, then 15, then 18, the whispers had grown louder. Wolfless omega, cursed blood. Her father had started the morning herbs shortly after, claiming they would help her develop her wolf, help her become what she was meant to be. She believed him. Desperate for any sign that she might finally belong, she choked down that bitter tea every morning without complaint, even as it made her sick, even as it left her weak and dizzy for hours afterward. It wasn't until her father's death 6 months ago that things had gotten truly bad. Cain had taken over as Alpha, and with their father gone, there was no one left who even pretended to care what happened to her. She'd been moved from her small bedroom to the servants' quarters. Her duties had tripled, the herbs had increased. And the beatings had started. Nothing that would leave permanent marks. Cain was too smart for that, but enough to remind her of her place, of what she was worth, enough to break her spirit piece by piece until she'd stopped hopping for anything better. Until tonight, when they'd finally decided she was more valuable as currency than as a punching bag. Standing in Cale's chambers, feeling the warmth of his hand against her bruised cheek, Elara felt something inside her crack. Not break, crack, like ice that had been frozen for too long finally beginning to thaw. "I don't understand," she whispered again because it was the only truth she had left. "You don't know me, how can you say these things?" Cale's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "I know you hum when you think you're alone. Old songs your mother taught you before she died, though you don't remember her teaching them. I know you're afraid of complete darkness, but you love thunderstorms. I know you have a scar on your left shoulder blade shaped like a crescent moon, from when you fell from a tree when you were 6 years old." Each word was a hammer blow, each impossible detail he shouldn't know, couldn't know. "Unless—" "I know you cry in your sleep," he continued, his voice dropping to something almost tender. "I know you dream of running through forests you've never seen, of a home you've never had, of a person you can't quite remember. I know because I've been there, Elara, in every dream, watching you, waiting for you, unable to reach you no matter how hard I tried." That's not possible. But even as she said it, Elara felt the truth of his words resonating in her bones. How many times had she woken with the sensation of someone watching her, protecting her? How many nights had she felt less alone than she should have been? "Sit," Cale said gently, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "Please, I can see you're exhausted and this conversation is going to take a while." It wasn't a command this time. It was a request. The difference was significant enough that Elara found herself moving to the chair, sinking into its cushioned embrace with a relief that made her realize just how tired she actually was. How long had it been since she'd slept? Since she'd felt safe enough to rest? Cale pulled another chair close to hers, close enough that their knees almost touched, but he didn't crowd her. Didn't use his size or his power to intimidate. He simply sat patient and present, waiting for her to be ready. "The dreams started when I was 7, he said finally, his eyes distant with memory. "At first I thought they were just nightmares. I'd see a little girl crying in a dark room, calling for a mother who never came. I'd wake up angry, frustrated that I couldn't help her. My father thought I was being weak, that I needed to train harder to strengthen my mind. So I did." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "But the dreams didn't stop. They got stronger, more detailed. As I grew, so did you in the dreams. I watched you learn to walk, to talk, to hide your tears so no one would see them. I watched you be pushed aside, ignored, hurt, and I couldn't do anything about it. I didn't even know if you were real." Elara's throat was tight. "When did you know?" 3 years ago. I dreamed of you standing in front of a mirror, looking at your reflection with such despair that it broke something in me. You whispered your name, just once. My name is Elara and I matter, like you were trying to convince yourself. She remembered that night. Remembered standing in the tiny washroom in the servants' quarters, staring at her reflection and trying to find something, anything, worth saving in the girl looking back at her. She'd been 15, and Dane had just told her that their father was ashamed to call her his daughter. "I spent the next year searching," Cale continued. "I sent scouts to every pack in a 100-mile radius. I described you to seers and elders, asking if they knew of a girl matching your description. Most thought I was mad. Some thought it was a trap. But one old seer, a woman who'd served my great-grandfather, she knew." "Knew what?" Cale's eyes met hers, and in them she saw something ancient, something that transcended the man sitting before her. "She told me about the mate bond. The true mate bond, not the political matches or the convenient pairings that most wolves settle for. She said that some bonds are so strong, they transcend time and space, that fated mates can find each other across dreams, across distances, long before they ever meet. It's rare, so rare that most wolves live their entire lives without experiencing it. But you think that's what this is? Elara's voice was barely a whisper. That we're fated mates. I don't think, Elara, I know. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. I've spent 13 years of my life connected to you, feeling what you feel, knowing you in ways that shouldn't be possible. And the moment you crossed into my territory tonight, the moment you stepped onto Shadowmere soil, the dreams stopped, because I didn't need them anymore. You were finally here, finally within reach. The implications crashed over her like a wave. Fated mates. The rarest, most precious gift the moon goddess could bestow. The kind of bond that legends were built on, that wars were fought over, that reshaped the very fabric of pack alliances and power structures. And according to this man, this Alpha King who ruled the most powerful pack in the north, that bond existed between them. I can see you don't believe me, Kale said quietly. Or maybe you do, and that terrifies you even more. Either way, I'm not asking you to accept this immediately. I'm not asking you for anything, Elara. I'm simply telling you the truth. You're my mate. You've always been my mate. And now that you're here, I'm going to spend every day proving to you that you're safe, you're valued, and you're exactly where you belong. My brothers, Elara started, then stopped, unsure how to form the question burning in her mind. Didn't know, Kale finished for her. They had no idea what they were bringing me. They thought they were selling a wolfless omega to use as a servant. They have no concept of what you actually are. Because I'm nothing, Elara said bitterly. I'm exactly what they think I am, wolfless, powerless, worthless. Kale's hand shot out, catching her chin and forcing her to meet his eyes. The touch was firm but not painful, commanding her attention without hurting her. Don't, he said, his voice hard. Don't ever let me hear you say that again. You are not worthless, you are not powerless, and you are definitely not wolfless. I've never shifted, Elara protested. I'm 20 years old and I've never. Because they've been suppressing you. The words were sharp, angry. Those herbs they've been feeding you, the morning tea, it's not to help you shift, it's to prevent it, to keep your wolf dormant, to keep your power locked away where it can't threaten them. The world tilted again. Elara felt sick, her mind racing back over years of mornings spent choking down that bitter liquid, years of believing it was for her own good. Why would they do that? Because they're afraid of you. Kale released her chin but kept his eyes locked on hers. Because somewhere deep down they know what you are, what you could become, and that terrifies them. Before Elara could respond, before she could even process what he was saying, a knock sounded at the door. Kale's expression shifted instantly, the gentleness replaced by the cold authority of an Alpha King. Enter, he commanded. The scarred man from earlier stepped inside, bowing his head respectfully. Forgive the interruption, my king, but the council is asking when you'll address them regarding your new acquisition. Kale's jaw tightened. Tell the council that what I do with my mate is none of their concern. The scarred man's eyes widened fractionally. Your mate, my king. My mate, Kale repeated, each word clear and deliberate. Elara is under my protection. Anyone who treats her as anything less than the future queen of this pack will answer to me personally. Is that understood? Yes, my king. The man bowed again, deeper this time, and when he straightened there was something like awe in his expression as he looked at Elara. Welcome home, my lady. The door closed, leaving them alone again. Elara sat frozen, her mind struggling to keep up with everything that was happening. Queen, he'd called her the future queen. I need you to understand something, Kale said, turning back to her. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me, no reason to believe anything I'm saying. But I'm going to give you time. I'm going to give you space. I'm not going to force a bond you're not ready for, and I'm certainly not going to claim you against your will. He stood, putting physical distance between them, and Elara felt the loss of his presence like a physical thing. You'll have your own chambers, your own space. No one will bother you, no one will make demands of you. You're free to explore the fortress, to meet the pack, to decide for yourself what you want. The only thing I ask is that you give me a chance. Give this a chance. Elara found herself nodding before she'd consciously decided to, her body responding to the sincerity in his voice, the promise in his words. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Kale echoed and smiled that small smile again. I'll have someone show you to your rooms. Rest, eat, recover from tonight. Tomorrow we can talk more. Tomorrow I can start showing you the truth of what you are. He moved to the door and Elara thought he would leave, would summon a servant to take her away. Instead he paused, his hand on the handle, and looked back at her. I have waited my entire life for you, Elara, he said softly. I will not begin it by taking you against your will. I will not be like the men who hurt you. I will not be like your brothers. I will be patient. I will be gentle. And I will prove to you, every single day, that you are worth waiting for. Then he was gone, and Elara was alone in the enormous chamber, her mind reeling, her heart pounding, every certainty she'd ever had about herself and her future crumbling to dust around her. Somewhere deep inside, in that suppressed place where her wolf should have been, something stirred. Something that recognized the truth in Kale's words, that knew with bone-deep certainty that everything was about to change. The chambers Elara was given were larger than the entire servants' quarters back in Clearwater territory. A massive bed dominated one wall, covered in furs and blankets that looked softer than anything she'd ever touched. A fireplace crackled with fresh flames, chasing away the winter chill. There was a bathing room with an actual tub, shelves lined with books, and windows that overlooked the forest stretching out beneath the moonlight. The woman who'd escorted her there, an older she-wolf named Myra with kind eyes and greying hair, had helped her out of her ruined dress and into a soft nightgown before leaving her alone with promises of food being brought up shortly. Elara stood at the window now, looking out at Shadowmere territory and trying to make sense of the last few hours. Fated mates, dreams, suppression. Every word Kale had spoken had the ring of truth, but accepting that truth meant accepting that everything she'd believed about herself was a lie. A knock at the door made her jump. Come in, she called, expecting Myra with food. Instead, a young woman around her own age entered, carrying a tray laden with bread, cheese, fruit, and what smelled like roasted meat. She had dark hair braided down her back and eyes that sparkled with curiosity. My lady, she said, setting the tray on a table near the fire. I'm Sira. I've been assigned as your personal attendant if you'll have me. I don't need an attendant, Elara said automatically, the words familiar from years of being told she didn't deserve such luxuries. Sira smiled. Perhaps not, but the Alpha King wants you to have one anyway. He's very insistent when it comes to your care. There was something knowing in her tone, something that made Elara's cheeks flush. How much do you know? About you being his fated mate, Sira asked bluntly. Everyone knows, well, everyone who matters. The whole pack will know by morning. It's not exactly the kind of secret an Alpha King can keep. Elara sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. Does that bother you, that he claims to be mated to someone like me? Someone like you, Sira repeated, her brow furrowing. You mean his destined mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself. Why would that bother anyone? Because I'm nothing, Elara said, the old words coming easily even though Kale had told her never to say them again. I'm wolfless, I'm from a weak pack. I was sold like property. Sira knelt in front of her chair, her expression fierce. You are the Alpha King's mate. That makes you the most important person in this entire pack, and from what I've heard the Alpha King has been waiting for you his whole life. Trust me, my lady, you are far from nothing. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they terrified her, because if everyone believed she was this important, this valuable, what would happen when they realized the truth? When they discovered she was exactly as worthless as her brothers had always claimed. Eat, Sira encouraged, standing and moving back to the tray. You look half-starved, and tomorrow is going to be a long day. The Alpha King wants to introduce you to the pack elders. Elara forced herself to eat, though the food tasted like ash in her mouth. Her mind was already racing ahead, imagining the looks on the elders' faces when they met the Alpha King's mate and found her wanting. She didn't sleep well that night. Her dreams were confused, fragmentary things filled with running wolves and eyes the color of storms and a voice that called her name like a promise. Morning came too quickly, announced by Sira entering with fresh clothes and news that the Alpha King requested her presence at breakfast. The dress Sira helped her into was simple but well-made, a deep blue that brought out the unusual violet tone in Elara's eyes. You're beautiful, Sira said softly, adjusting the neckline. Truly, I don't think you realize it. Elara looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw what she always saw. A thin girl with tangled brown hair, eyes too large for her face, skin too pale from years spent mostly indoors. Nothing special, nothing worth a second glance. But when Sira led her to the dining hall and Kale looked up from his seat at the head of the table, the expression on his face said otherwise. He stood immediately, his eyes never leaving hers, and the entire room fell silent. "Elara," he said, and her name in his mouth was a caress. "Come, sit beside me." The seat to his right, the place of honor, had been left empty. For her, Elara moved toward it on unsteady legs, feeling the weight of a dozen gazes tracking her progress. Pack members, she realized, wolves of rank and importance, all staring at the girl their king had claimed as his mate. Kale held her chair, a gesture of respect that made several people in the room murmur in surprise. When she was seated, he returned to his own chair but immediately reached over, taking her hand in his and lacing their fingers together. The contact sent electricity up her arm, made that suppressed thing inside her surge forward desperately. She gasped softly, and Kale's grip tightened. "Breathe," he murmured, quiet enough that only she could hear. "I've got you." Breakfast was a surreal experience. People spoke to her, asked her questions, treated her with deference that made her skin crawl with discomfort. She was used to being invisible, to being beneath notice. This attention, this respect, felt wrong. But Kale never left her side, never let go of her hand, never let anyone make her feel less than she was. When one elder, a grizzled man named Rothgar, questioned why the Alpha King would claim a mate from such a weak bloodline, Kale's response was immediate and brutal. "Question my mate's worth again," he said, his voice dropping to something lethal, "and you'll find yourself exiled before nightfall. Elara's bloodline is stronger than you can possibly imagine. You simply lack the vision to see it." The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. When it was finally over, Kale led Elara from the dining hall, his hand still holding hers, his presence a shield between her and the curious, suspicious eyes that followed them. "I'm sorry," he said once they were alone in a corridor. "I know that was difficult." "They don't believe you," Elara said quietly. "About us, about me being your mate." "They don't need to believe, they just need to respect." Kale turned to face her, using his free hand to tilt her chin up. "But you need to believe, Elara. You need to understand what you are, what you're capable of, and there's only one way to do that." "How?" "We stop the suppression, we let your wolf free." Fear lanced through her, sharp and immediate. What if there's nothing there? What if I really am wolfless? Kale smiled, and in his eyes she saw absolute certainty. "Then I'll eat my crown. Trust me, Elara, trust the bond. Let me show you the truth." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main gates. Shouting, the sound of weapons being drawn. Kale's expression hardened instantly, his hand moving to the blade at his hip. "Stay here," he commanded, but Elara was already moving with him, some instinct demanding she stay close, stay protected by his presence. They reached the courtyard to find Kale's guards surrounding 3 familiar figures. Elara's blood ran cold. Her brothers had returned. "We demand to speak with the Alpha King," Kane was saying, his voice carrying across the courtyard with false confidence. "We have information about the girl we sold you, information you'll want to hear." Kale's hand found Elara's waist, pulling her close against his side in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "I'm listening," he said coldly. Kane's eyes found Elara, and something ugly twisted his features. "We've reconsidered the transaction. We're willing to take her back for half the payment. Consider it a gesture of goodwill between packs." "No," the word was flat, final, leaving no room for negotiation. "You haven't heard what we have to offer," Dane interjected, stepping forward. "Information about her bloodline, about why she's really been suppressed all these years." Interest flickered in Kale's expression, though his grip on Elara didn't loosen. "I'm listening." Marcus, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "Our father discovered something before he died, a prophecy, about a daughter born under a blood moon with royal blood from both sides, a girl who would either unite the packs or destroy them all." Elara felt Kale go very still beside her. "Continue." "Elara's mother wasn't just any Luna," Kane said, and there was greed in his eyes now, the kind that came from holding valuable information. "She was descended from the original royal line, the first pack, the one that all others came from. That makes Elara." "Royalty," Kale finished, his voice barely a whisper. "True royalty, not just by title but by blood." Her brothers exchanged glances, clearly pleased that their information was landing as intended. "So you see," Dane said, "she's worth far more than 300 silver pieces. We're willing to renegotiate. 5,000 and we'll take her back, keep her suppressed, keep the prophecy from being fulfilled." The silence that followed was deafening. Elara could feel Kale's rage building, could sense it in the tension of his body, the tightness of his jaw, the way his fingers dug into her waist. "Let me make something very clear," he said, his voice dropping to something that made even the guards step back nervously. "Elara is not a commodity to be bought and sold. She is not a secret to be kept or a problem to be managed. She is my mate, my fated mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself, and you have just confirmed everything I suspected about why you suppressed her." He took a step forward, pulling Elara with him. "You were afraid, terrified that if she came into her power she would eclipse you, that she would take the position of Alpha that you thought was yours by right, so you poisoned her, weakened her, tried to break her spirit so thoroughly that she'd never rise against you." Kane's face flushed with anger. "She's a curse, she killed our mother." "Your mother died in childbirth," Kale snarled. "A tragedy, but not a curse. The only curse here is you, men who would sell their own blood for silver and call it good business." "You can't keep her," Dane said desperately. "The prophecy will be fulfilled," Kale interrupted, "because I'm going to help her become everything you tried to prevent. I'm going to give her the power you suppressed, the recognition you denied her, the love you never showed her. And when she stands as Lunar Queen of Shadowmere, when she unites the packs under her rule, you will remember that you had the chance to be part of her rise. Instead, you'll be the footnotes in history, the ones who were too blind to see greatness when it was right in front of you." He gestured to his guards. "Escort them off Shadowmere territory. If they return, kill them." "You can't do this." Kane lunged forward and chaos erupted. Later, Elara wouldn't remember the exact sequence of events. She'd remember Kane's hand reaching for her. She'd remember the surge of panic, the desperate need to protect herself. She'd remember something inside her finally breaking free. And she'd remember the light. It started in her chest, a warmth that spread outward like wildfire. The suppressed thing, the locked-away power that had pulsed beneath her skin for 20 years, exploded outward in a cascade of silver light that lit up the entire courtyard. Her brothers screamed, the guards fell back, even Kale stepped away, his eyes wide with something that looked like wonder. And Elara shifted. The transformation was agony and ecstasy in equal measure. Bones breaking and reforming, muscles tearing and rebuilding, skin giving way to fur. But through the pain, through the overwhelming sensation of becoming, Elara felt right for the first time in her life. When it was over, when the light faded and she stood on 4 legs instead of 2, the courtyard was silent. Because Elara wasn't just any wolf. She was massive, nearly as large as Kale in his alpha form. Her fur was silver white, shot through with veins of what looked like pure starlight that pulsed with each heartbeat. Her eyes, when she looked down at her reflection in a nearby puddle, glowed violet. She was beautiful, she was powerful. She was everything they'd tried to keep her from becoming. Kale shifted beside her, his own wolf a dark contrast to her light, massive and dangerous and perfect. When he pressed his nose to her neck, when she felt the rumble of approval in his chest, something inside Elara clicked into place. The bond, the fated mate bond that he'd spoken of. She felt it now, thrumming between them like a living thing, connecting them in ways that went beyond physical, beyond conscious thought. "Mine," his wolf said, not with words but with feeling that she understood instinctively. "Mine," her wolf agreed, and the rightness of it, the truth of it, made her want to throw her head back and howl. Her brothers were forgotten, cowering at the edge of the courtyard. The guards had dropped to their knees, heads bowed in automatic submission to the power radiating from her. Even the elders who'd questioned her worth that morning were kneeling, recognition and awe written across their faces. Kale shifted back to human form, not caring about his nakedness. And Elara followed suit. The transformation back was easier, more natural, as if her body finally understood what it was meant to do. She stood before him naked and unashamed, silver light still dancing across her skin, and waited. "There you are," Kale breathed, reaching out to cup her face in both hands. "There's my queen, the girl I've been dreaming of, the woman you were always meant to become." "I don't know what I'm doing," Elara whispered, and her voice was different now, stronger, clearer. "Neither do I," Kale admitted and smiled. "But we'll figure it out together, you and me, Alpha King and Lunar Queen, fated mates who were separated by fear and reunited by fate." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "I have waited my entire life for you, Elara. Every dream, every night, every moment led to this, to you standing here in your power, finally free. What happens now? She asked, aware of their audience, aware that this moment was being witnessed by dozens of wolves who would carry the story far and wide. Now, Kale said loud enough for everyone to hear, we begin. Now we unite the packs. Now we fulfill the prophecy. Now we show the world what happens when fate and power and love collide. He kissed her then in front of the whole pack, and Elara felt the bond between them solidify into something unbreakable. This was her future. This man, this pack, this power thrumming through her veins. This was home. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change and discovery. Elara trained with Kale, learning to control her shift, to harness the power that had been locked away for so long. Her wolf was strong, fast, and carried a gift that left even the pack elders speechless. She could heal, not just herself but others. When one of the younger wolves was injured during training, Elara had instinctively placed her hands on the wound and watched as silver light knit torn flesh back together. The prophecy spoke of a healer queen, one elder said, or in his voice, one who would unite through power and compassion. You are that queen. But with power came responsibility. Neighboring packs heard rumors of the Alpha King's mate, of her unprecedented abilities, and some came in peace while others came with challenges. Kale handled the political maneuvering with the skill of someone born to leadership, but he never made decisions about alliances or treaties without consulting Elara first. You're not just my mate, he told her one night as they stood together on the balcony outside their chambers. You're my equal, my partner, your voice matters as much as mine. Elara was learning what it felt like to be valued, to be respected, to be loved. Because Kale loved her, he showed it in 1,000 small ways, the way he always found her hand in a crowd, the way he listened when she spoke, really listened as if her words were treasures, the way he held her at night, patient and gentle despite the bond urging them toward completion. I won't rush you, he'd promised. When you're ready, when you want this as much as I do, that's when we'll complete the bond. 3 months after her arrival at Shadowmere, Elara stood in the council chamber facing her brothers one final time. They'd been brought before the pack to answer for their crimes, not just the selling of Elara, but years of abuse and suppression that violated pack law. Cain looked smaller now, diminished in the face of Elara's power. Dane couldn't meet her eyes. Marcus, surprisingly, looked ashamed. By rights, Kale said from his throne, Elara seated beside him in a matching seat that had been carved specifically for her, your crimes warrant exile or death. You poisoned and sold your own blood. You suppressed an alpha female and denied her wolf. You attempted to prevent the fulfillment of prophecy for your own gain. The brothers said nothing, perhaps knowing that no defense would save them. Elara stood and the room fell silent. This was her judgment to make, Kale had said, her brothers, her choice. You spent my entire life telling me I was worthless, she said, her voice carrying through the chamber. You beat me, starved me, poisoned me, sold me, all because you were afraid of what I might become if given the chance. She descended from the dais, walking toward where they knelt in chains. You were right to be afraid, because what I've become is everything you tried to prevent. I am Luna, Queen of Shadowmere. I am a healer. I am loved by a man who has waited his entire life for me. I am powerful. I am valued. I am worthy. She stopped in front of Cain, looking down at the man who'd tormented her for so many years. But I am also merciful. I am compassionate. I am everything you never taught me to be, everything I learned despite your cruelty. Elara turned back to face Kale and the assembled council. I stripped them of their titles. They are no longer of Clearwater blood. They are no longer pack, but I will not kill them and I will not exile them to certain death. She looked at her brothers again. You will leave Shadowmere territory and you will never return. You will live with the knowledge that the girl you thought was worthless became a queen, and you will remember every day for the rest of your lives that you had the chance to be part of something great. Instead, you chose fear. That's it, Dane spat. You're just letting us go. Elara smiled, and it was not a kind expression. I'm giving you what you gave me, a chance to survive. What you do with it is up to you. The brothers were escorted out that afternoon. Elara watched from the tower as they disappeared into the forest, 3 figures growing smaller and smaller until they were gone entirely. Kale's arms came around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. You were merciful, he murmured into her hair. I was free, Elara corrected. They can't hurt me anymore. They can't touch what we're building here. And what are we building? Elara turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd waited for her, dreamed of her, recognized her when no one else could. A future, she said simply. One where power and compassion exist together, where strength doesn't require cruelty, where fated mates actually get their happy ending. Cale kissed her then, and Elara felt the bond between them pulse with life and possibility. There was still so much to do, packs to unite, a prophecy to fulfill, a kingdom to build. But tonight, in this moment, she was simply Elara, the girl who'd been sold to a rival pack and found out she was a queen, the woman who'd been told she was worthless and discovered she was priceless. The Luna who'd been dreamed about since childhood and finally found her way home. "I'm ready," she whispered against his lips and felt him still. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "Complete the bond with me, Cale. Make me yours in every way." The look on his face was everything she'd never dared hope for. Love, desire, reverence. "You've always been mine," he said, "from the very first dream, but I will spend every night for the rest of our lives proving that I'm yours too." He carried her inside, and Elara went willingly, eagerly, toward the future she'd been denied for so long, toward the man who'd seen her when she was invisible, toward the bond that had transcended dreams and distance and every obstacle placed in their path. Her brothers had sold her to the rival pack, thinking they were rid of a burden. Instead, they'd delivered a queen to her throne. And if you're still watching, if you've stayed with Elara this whole journey from souled Omega to Lunar Queen, then you know this is just the beginning. Because there are still packs to unite, prophecies to fulfill, and enemies who will come for a queen this powerful. What happens when Elara discovers the full extent of her healing powers? When other alphas challenge Cale's claim? When the prophecy reveals its final, devastating truth? That story is still being written. And if you want to know how it ends, if you want to see Elara come into her full power and watch as she and Cale reshape the very foundations of pack law, then you need to tell me. Comment below. Tell me what you think happens next. Tell me what you want to see, because this queen's story is far from over. And neither is yours with her.